At the top of the Lexington Crown Tower, overlooking a sleepless Manhattan skyline, stood a man who no longer believed in love. Jonathan Cross leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, the rain painting soft trails down the glass like ghostly fingertips. The city buzzed far below, a muted, distant hum that mirrored the hollow space inside him. Behind him, silence reigned. No music, no voices. Just the occasional clink of ice in his scotch glass. Once upon a time, Jonathan had believed in grand gestures. He'd sent roses for no reason, scribbled notes on napkins, and held hands just to feel close. But that man disappeared the day he walked into his fiancée's apartment to surprise her and found Victoria Wells tangled in sheets with someone else. Not just anyone. Landon Pierce. His oldest rival was the smug tailored shark who had spent years trying to steal everything that mattered, clients, contracts, and now. Her, Jonathan hadn't yelled. He hadn't begged. He just walked out, closed the door behind him, and never looked back. The betrayal didn't break him in noise or rage. It cracked him silently like ice under pressure. In the weeks that followed, he buried himself in deals, numbers, and late-night mergers. He became a polished version of himself, untouchable. No one asked questions anymore. He learned to smile without warmth, laugh without feeling. His parents noticed, his mother with quiet worry, his father with a simple, cold line. Ewell. Learn, he didn't learn. He locked himself behind walls so high, not even his closest friend could climb over, Graham Walters. His childhood friend and business partner remained the only person who could still glimpse what was left of him. Beneath the suits and stockholder reports, Jonathan was bleeding in places no one could see. Love had become a liability. Motion was weakness, vulnerability, a risk he would never take again. Women came and went, models, intellectuals, women, who knew how to play the part at charity galas and board dinners, but none of them reached him. He gave just enough to intrigue, never enough to matter. He had perfected the art of detachment. Until the night of the gala, the annual Empire Benefactors Ball held at the opulent Vanderbilt's, grand. A spectacle of glittering gowns, tuxedos, ego, and million-dollar champagne. Jonathan hated these events. They were shallow displays dressed up as goodwill. But Cross Enterprises was a key sponsor, and his presence was expected. His assistant Marla reviewed the evening schedule. His tailor delivered the custom tux. The black Bentley waited downstairs. Jonathan stared at his reflection in the mirror as he fastened his cufflinks, his hazel eyes dulled to ice. Jaw sharp with control. Indifference, he whispered to himself. Feel nothing. Expect nothing. As the elevator descended, he allowed himself one slow breath. Not hope, not dread, just breath. But fate had other plans, because that night, across the ballroom, beneath the crystal chandeliers, a woman walked in who didn't belong to the world he knew. And yet somehow, it felt like the world had been rearranged to make space for her. Rachel Monroe. He didn't know her name yet, but he would, because the moment she entered the room, everything in him, everything frozen and buried, felt the pressure of thaw. She didn't walk. She arrived, crimson silk dress that bared her back and defied tradition. Dark chestnut hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes carried storms, her mouth a smirk that said, I know something you don't. She wasn't there to fit in. She wasn't there to please. Rachel Monroe was chaos wrapped in confidence, and the room noticed. Whispers followed her. Rumors clung like perfume. The Monroe heiress who crashed a Porsche into a museum fountain, who showed up at a charity gala and a wedding gown just to annoy her father. A wild child, headline in heels. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Graham, standing beside him with a glass of bourbon, gave a low laugh. Speak of the devil, Graham murmured. And there she burns. Jonathan didn't turn right away. He already felt the disturbance in the air. But when he did, his gaze locked on her like gravity. Graham nudged him. I dare you. To what? Jonathan asked coolly, not taking his eyes off Rachel. Tame her, Graham said. Make her into someone polished, someone the board would approve of. You've done it with companies. Try it with a woman. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. You want me to babysit a wildfire? I think Graham replied with a grin. You need a distraction. And she needs an exit. From herself, from her family, from the narrative she's trapped in. Their eyes met. This wasn't a joke, not between them. It was a challenge. 3 months, Graham said. Make her marriage material. The kind of woman no one would laugh at if she stood beside you. And if I win, Jonathan asked, I'll hand over my 12% stake in the Monroe Cross merger. No strings. Jonathan went still. That stake would give him control. Control he had been negotiating for over a year. And if I lose, Graham's smile widened. Your Aspen penthouse. Full deed. No questions. Silence thickened. Jonathan looked at Rachel again. She was laughing, surrounded by men drawn to her flame. But her eyes, those eyes weren't laughing. They were tired. Like joy was just something she wore. He knew that look. Deal, Jonathan said, extending his hand. They shook on it. Silent war had begun. Minutes later, Jonathan approached Rachel Monroe for the first time. Rachel Monroe, he said, voice smooth, calm. She turned slow, measuring him. Her gaze didn't flinch. Jonathan Cross. I didn't expect you to speak to me. Why not? 'Cause men like you don't waste time on women like me. No, he asked. She smirked. I'm the warning label. You're the product. Maybe I'm not like other men. Maybe I'm not like other women. Neither blinked. Under the chandeliers, something passed between them. Not chemistry, not flirtation. Something more dangerous. Recognition. And so the game began. Not of seduction, but of survival. A battle between ice and fire, logic and chaos. Neither of them knew that what started as a dare would rewrite both of their lives. The Monroe estate was a marble fortress disguised as a home, endless corridors, crystal chandeliers, and cold portraits of people Rachel had never cared to meet. She hated every inch of it. The manicured gardens. Outside were unnaturally perfect, and the silence inside was the kind that smothered. She had been raised in wealth, but never in warmth. Rachel had worn designer shoes before she knew how to tie laces. But all the luxury had done was wrap her in expectation, suffocating, rigid, merciless. After her mother passed, everything shifted. Her father, Walter Monroe, didn't grieve. He simply restructured. The family, the business, Rachel. And then came Claudia, the woman who married Walter, and immediately began micromanaging Rachel's life like a hostile takeover. Not a stepmother. More like a PR manager who cared only about image. Your mother was elegance. Try to live up to that, Claudia would say, lips tight with condescension. But Rachel had no interest in being elegant. She wanted to be free, so she rebelled. Loudly, crashing luxury cars, wearing red to funerals, lighting cigars at charity auctions. Every headline was a warning. Don't get too close. But nothing had prepared her for what came next. A dinner. A contract. A name. You're meeting Gregory Mathers tomorrow, Walter had said. Like he was assigning her to a marketing campaign. He owns half of Westfield Oil. A marriage would solidify the merger. Rachel blinked. He's 60. Was on the cover of a scandal tabloid last year. Don't be childish, Claudia had chimed in. You need to settle. Rachel laughed, but it was empty. I'd rather elope with a circus clown. Do this for the family, Walter snapped. That night, Rachel packed a small suitcase, nothing dramatic, just a few essentials, and drove until the city faded in the rear view. She slept in a roadside motel that smelled like damp curtains and burnt coffee. And for the first time in years, she felt free to breathe, to think. She returned the next morning not to give in, but to regroup. Rebellion was a scream. Strategy. Strategy could become escape. That's when the invitation arrived. A handwritten card on gold-embossed paper, the Empire Benefactors Ball. She nearly threw it out. But something told her to go. The red dress she wore that night wasn't for seduction. It was armor, and when Jonathan Krause approached her with his icy charm and that voice made of steel and silence, she knew something dangerous was happening. 2 days later, his proposal came. Not with roses, not with candlelight, with a contract, marriage. He said, "No love, no expectations, just mutual benefit. You'll get out of your arrangement," he added, "and I'll gain a wife. The press will focus on the spectacle, not the details." It should have felt cold. It should have felt insulting, but it didn't. It intrigued her, because for the first time in her life, someone wasn't trying to fix her or turn her into some perfect trophy. Jonathan didn't want a doll. He wanted a partner, even if only in name. Rachel stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time before she signed the document. She thought about her mother, about all the love that had died in silence. This wasn't about romance. This was about power, about choice. She picked up the pen and signed, not to belong to him, but to escape everyone else. Wedding day, they married in a ballroom, the Regency Imperial, the kind of place designed to impress and not much else. White roses, crystal chandeliers, four-string quartet playing Vivaldi with machine precision. Everything staged. Everything. Sterile. Rachel stood before a mirror as Claudia fastened the final pearl at her neck. "Smile gently when you walk," Claudia said. "Too much, and you'll look desperate." Rachel said nothing. She hadn't spoken to Claudia in days. She just stared at the veil. To most, it symbolized purity. To her, it looked like a curtain designed to hide the truth. A knock at the door. Jonathan entered. Black suit, charcoal tie. Perfect. But Rachel noticed what others never would. Tightness in his jaw, the subtle lines beneath his eyes. He didn't say she looked beautiful. She didn't expect him to. "Ready?" he asked. "Let's get it over with," she replied. They didn't walk hand in hand down the aisle. They walked side by side like two executives arriving at a press conference. There were no vows from the heart, no kiss. Just signatures, documents, a performance for the watching world as he slipped the ring on her finger. His hand brushed hers, cold, heavy, silent. Something stirred inside her, not love, not sadness, but a small voice whispering, "Is this really all you're meant for?" They exited the ceremony to polite claps, nothing more. The rooftop reception was beautiful, white orchids, vintage wine, jazz carried on the breeze. Rachel stood by the railing, staring at the Manhattan skyline. Jonathan joined her. "You did well today. Is that a compliment or a quarterly report?" He smirked faintly. "People are calling it the event of the year, of course. It's broken people signing a contract under chandelier light. That's front-page material." Then he asked unexpectedly, "Why did you say yes?" Rachel looked out over the city. "Because I didn't want to be someone else's property. At least with you, I chose." He nodded, and that was that. No dance, no toast, just two strangers playing pretend, unaware they were already standing at the edge of something real. Doors shut behind them, sealing out the world. Inside the penthouse suite at the Crown Imperial, the fire crackled quietly in the hearth. Golden sconces painted soft halos on the ivory walls. Jasmine lingered in the air, Rachel's perfume, subtle, haunting. It's uncertain whether it wanted to stay. It was a room meant for new beginnings, for intimacy, for celebration. But to Rachel and Jonathan, it felt like a courtroom. She stepped out of her heels and let them fall to the plush rug with a soft thud. Her wedding gown whispered across the floor as she walked to the window. Staring out over the city like it might offer a better version of her reflection, Jonathan remained. Near the door, one hand still on the brass handle, unsure if he should stay or walk away. He had never felt out of place in his own space before, never feared a room. But this moment with her, it unmoored him. This was supposed to be simple, a deal, a performance. Yet here they were, trapped in a silence neither had prepared for. Rachel broke it first. "Champagne." Her voice was calm, perhaps too calm. Jonathan exhaled. "Sure." She poured them both a glass. When she handed his over, their fingers touched briefly, just a brush, but the spark that followed sent a ripple through the air. He raised his glass. "To the deal." She clinked hers against his. "To survival." Jonathan drank. She didn't, instead. She placed her glass on the counter and turned to face him fully. Her spine straight, her hands folded. No drama, no performance. Just truth. I need to tell you something, she said. He set his glass down carefully. Now, yes, tonight. Before anything happens between us. Jonathan watched her. The tension in her knuckles, the steadiness in her eyes. He nodded once. Go on. Rachel took a breath, then another. I'm a virgin. The words landed not with shock, but with silence, the kind that reorients a room. Jonathan blinked. Of all the confessions he'd anticipated, this hadn't even crossed his mind. You, he said, not to doubt her, but to try and understand. She nodded. I know what they say about me, she continued. I'm reckless, that I sleep around, that I light fires wherever I go. Let them think it. It kept the wrong people away. It made me untouchable. Her voice wavered only slightly. But I never gave that part of myself to anyone, not because I was saving it for a fairy tale, because I didn't want it taken or used. Jonathan turned toward the window, his reflection caught between the firelight and the cold city. Skyline. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he said, I misjudged you. Rachel gave a small, breathy laugh. You wouldn't be the first. No, he replied. But I was probably the most arrogant. Another pause, then her voice softer. I didn't tell you this to manipulate you, Jonathan. I told you because even if this marriage isn't real, I wanted our first anything, to be honest. Turned to face her. Something in his expression had shifted. Less armor, more truth. But also conflict. Vulnerability wasn't his language, yet here he was, standing in it. Why now? He asked. Rachel looked between them, at the inches of space that somehow felt heavier than miles. Because once it happens, whatever it is, can't be undone. I want the next thing between us, if there is a next thing, to be a choice, not a consequence. Jonathan's chest rose and fell slowly. He stepped forward, not to touch her, just to close the space. Then he said quietly, then tonight nothing happens. Not unless you want it to. Rachel searched his face for any hint of game, of pity, of performance. There was none, only respect, only restraint. She nodded once, and for a while neither moved. They simply stood there, two people in a room built for romance, navigating the space between secrets and sincerity. And somewhere in Jonathan's mind, a voice whispered something he wasn't ready to hear. She's not just part of the bet. She's the part I didn't plan for. The Cross estate sat on the cliffs above the Hudson River. All steel and glass, towering and cold, a fortress disguised as a home. Designed by award-winning architects and polished to perfection, was everything Jonathan valued. Silence, control. Precision. Rachel arrived 2 days after the wedding. The black car rolled past the iron gates and down. A gravel path flanked by trimmed hedges and classical statues. Fountains carved in marble gushed like they had something to prove. But inside the car, Rachel sat with sunglasses on, leather jacket zipped, jaw clenched. Her expression said what her voice didn't. Don't tell me where I belong. Inside the estate was colder than the air outside. Gleaming floors. Polished wood, no clutter, no laughter. Just stillness arranged like a museum. A butler greeted her. Staff lined the hallway like furniture, rigid, trained, silent. Her new room was in the east wing. Far from Jonathan's, it had its own sitting area, fireplace, and walk-in closet the size of a studio apartment. The bed was enormous, untouched. She sat on the edge of it and stared into the quiet. So this was marriage. The first week passed like a silent ballet. Rachel explored the house like a trespasser. She wandered halls that felt haunted. She tested boundaries that didn't technically exist. She asked the chef for strange meals, moved the piano bench 3 inches to the left, blasted old rock music from the rooftop terrace. One afternoon, just because she felt like it, she rode a horse across the back lawn wearing nothing but a silk robe and combat boots. Jonathan never said a word. He watched from a distance, polite but silent, controlled but not cold. At dinners, He made small talk about European market trends. Never asked what her day was like, never commented on the smudges of dirt on her dress or the flecks of hay in her hair, but he noticed everything. Rachel could feel it, the way he observed her, not like a man judging, but like one trying to solve a mystery he hadn't expected to care about. Once, she caught him standing in the library doorway as she flipped through a photography book, barefoot on the floor, hair a mess. Their eyes met. He disappeared before she could say anything, so she started leaving signs, subtle ones, her perfume in his office, her bracelets on his desk, jazz records she loved, left spinning in rooms he passed through. Yes. None of it was coincidence, and still, he said nothing. But she could feel it, the cracks in his composure. His restraint wasn't apathy, it was effort. So she pushed harder. One afternoon, she returned from a wild joyride in his vintage Aston Martin. Hair windblown, cheeks flushed, engine still rumbling. She tossed the keys on the hall table and waited for him to lose it. He didn't. That evening, the car was cleaned, refueled, and returned to the garage. Another night, she wore a silk red slip to dinner. No reason, no occasion, just to watch his jaw tighten. It did. He didn't comment. Just passed her the dessert spoon, his fingers lingering a second longer than usual. They weren't having conversations. They were playing games, and neither of them knew what the prize was. Rachel began to notice details. How he always loosened his tie at exactly 9:13 p.m., how he never poured his own whiskey. He only accepted it when brought. How he stared at the river every dusk, unmoving, like it was the only thing that didn't disappoint him. Some nights she heard piano music drifting through the halls. Not from speakers, from hands. She didn't know Jonathan played, but she listened. Curled in her bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the sound made her chest ache. Not from longing, from recognition, because they were the same survivors. In elegant cages, well-dressed disasters. Then, one morning, she opened her bedroom door and found a bouquet of white tulips. No card. She stared at them for a long time. Didn't ask. He didn't explain, but it meant something. Later that week, they passed in the hall. He was headed to a video conference. She was returning from the stables, boots muddy, jeans torn, laughing too. Herself. Jonathan looked her over, expression unreadable. Then he said, "You're ruining the Persian rugs?" She tilted her head. Maybe they need to be ruined. He walked past her without responding, but there was a smile. Barely there, ghost-like, and that changed everything. Because Rachel hadn't expected love. She'd expected to be tolerated, dismissed, controlled, not seen. And Jonathan, he had expected a problem, not a reflection, and reflections don't lie. By the third week, Jonathan Cross could no longer ignore what he was starting to feel. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't even affection. It was disruption, because Rachel Monroe was not who she was supposed to be. She was supposed to be a walking scandal, a party crasher in red stilettos, a fire that would burn out quickly. But what he began noticing, quietly, without announcement, were the small things. It started in the kitchen. He had come down earlier than usual, shirt unbuttoned, coffee halfway poured, only to find Maria, the head chef, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Before he could ask, she smiled, shook her head, whispered, "It's nothing, Mr. Cross, just gratitude." He frowned. Gratitude. She hesitated. "Mrs. Cross, she helped my son get into college. Paid the application fees. Quietly, no attention. But I know it was her." Jonathan didn't respond. He just went upstairs and checked it. It was true. She'd done the same for others. Quiet payments to cover medical bills, funeral costs, school supplies. All through a shell account, no receipts. No recognition. She didn't tell anyone, not even him. That night he watched her from the upstairs balcony. She left the estate alone, in jeans and a hoodie, walking down the woodland path that led to Wardtown. Curious. Jonathan followed from a distance. She didn't notice. he saw her disappear into an old, red brick building at the edge of the city. A converted church that now served as a community shelter. He stood outside in the rain, watching through warped glass as she unpacked crates of canned food, laid out blankets, and helped an elderly woman put on her coat. Laughter rose from the back of the room as children circled her legs. And Rachel, who tabloids called reckless, served soup with the comfort of someone who'd done it 100 times. No cameras, no Instagram posts, no attention, just carrot. Didn't fit, and that's why it unraveled him. The next morning at breakfast, she sat across from him in a silk robe and messy bun, flipping through a worn copy of Pablo Neruda. She hadn't said a word about where she'd been, but he couldn't. "Stop watching her. Do I have something on my face?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No," he said softly. "Not at all." She smirked and went back to her book, but something in the way he'd said it made her pause. Later that week, he asked James, the estate's head gardener, about the unused greenhouse on the lower property. It had been locked for years, James nodded. "Mrs. Cross goes down there sometimes. Said she wanted to try growing her own herbs. I didn't have the heart to tell her the soil's terrible." Jonathan made a note. That evening, he walked there alone. Inside, he found clay pots, half filled with earth. A gardening book lay open on the floor. A speaker played soft vintage jazz, the kind that didn't belong to Rachel's public image. He didn't touch anything, just stood there, hands in his pockets, asking himself the only question that made sense. Who is this woman I married? Shh. Never mentioned the shelter, or the donations, or the greenhouse. But he began to change. He started coming to dinner earlier, staying longer in shared spaces. He left notes instead of reminders. One evening, when she mentioned having a migraine, brought her a cup of chamomile tea without saying a word. She didn't thank him, but she drank it. That night, when the ache in her head finally faded, she walked to the piano outside his study and played a melody soft, unpolished, unsure, inside. Jonathan froze. It wasn't a love song. It was a question. He didn't answer it. Not then, but he heard it days later. She received a delivery, new gardening gloves, fresh soil, a rare book on medicinal plants. No card. But she knew, that evening, when they passed in the hallway, their eyes met, not like strangers, not like opponents, like people learning each other's shape. There were still walls between them, but now. There were windows, too, and sometimes sunlight slipped through. It didn't happen in a single moment. There was no dramatic kiss, no sudden declaration, no orchestral swell in the background. The shift between Rachel and Jonathan happened slowly, so slowly they didn't even realize they had stopped being strangers. It began with books. Rachel had found a worn, annotated copy of The Great Gatsby in the estate library. She flipped through the pages idly, then carefully. Margins were filled with small, neat handwriting thoughts beside lines about longing, about illusion, about unreachable dreams. One note read, "Hope is dangerous, but it's the only thing worth protecting." She recognized the handwriting. Jonathan's that night, she left the book on his desk with a yellow sticky note attached. "You annotate like someone who feels more than he admits." He never mentioned it, but 3 nights later, she found a different book waiting for her in the same spot, The Art of War. Ribbon marking a single line, "Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak." No note, but she understood it. They started exchanging books like that. Back and forth, no words. Just margin notes and chapter markings. Their own quiet language. They also stopped avoiding each other. They started walking through the garden at the same time, reading in the same room, sitting on the same couch opposite. Ends at first, then closer. Then not moving at all when elbows brushed. There were fewer guards in their eyes, fewer performances. One evening, as early autumn settled in and the estate trees turned copper and gold, they sat on the stone bench beneath the old willow overlooking the river. Rachel had a blanket draped over her legs and a steaming mug of tea in her hands. Jonathan joined her without a word, sitting inches away. They watched the water for a long time. Then she asked softly, "Did you ever love her?" He didn't ask who. He knew. He let out a breath. Yes, Rachel nodded. And did it destroy you? Jonathan turned slightly, studying her profile the way her lips pressed together like she was holding in too many truths. No, he said. It made me stop believing. She nodded again. That's worse, she whispered. They didn't speak after that. But the silence between them was no longer cold.
Right.
It was the kind that holds space for understanding. The next day, as they passed each other in the hallway, Rachel was barefoot, carrying a bowl of strawberries and humming something soft. Jonathan paused. What song is that? She looked up, surprised. Something my mom used to hum while brushing my hair. I don't know the name. He didn't smile, but he didn't leave either. I used to fall asleep to piano, she added, I think. I think that's why I linger outside your study. His gaze dropped. Then came his voice quiet, not an order, but an invitation. Don't have to linger. You can come in. That night she did. She walked in without knocking. Sat in the velvet chair near the corner. He played first Chopin, then Debussy, then something improvised. The notes wandered like a story trying to find its way home. Rachel closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt safe over. The next few weeks, their connection grew, not through passion, through presence. One night, they accidentally ended up in the kitchen at the same time. She was craving something sweet. He was chasing a headache. They made cookies, burned every batch, laughed harder than they had in years. Another night, she fell asleep on the couch during a black and white movie. When she woke, there was a blanket over her shoulders and a note on the table. You talk in your sleep. It's oddly charming. She wrote back the next morning. You watch people like puzzles. You're not as unreadable as you think. They never exchanged the notes. In person, but they always found them, like leaving matches in the dark. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled low in the distance, they sat by the fire pretending to read. Rachel looked up suddenly. Why me? What? Jonathan didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at her, he said, because you made a room full of powerful people feel small. You didn't need arrogance to do it. She smiled. No, that's the nicest backhanded compliment I've ever received. He turned to her, eyes steady. It wasn't backhanded. They stared at each other for a second too long, and something shifted again. That night, as Rachel stood on her balcony with the wind pulling gently at her robe, she heard footsteps behind her. Jonathan, he didn't speak, just stood beside her, watching the sky. Do you believe in second chances? She asked quietly. His voice came low. I don't know. Would you take one? If it showed up? He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. And in that silence, heavy, uncertain, but present, Rachel felt something inside her begin to bloom. Not because he reached for her, but because he didn't let her fall. Rachel had learned how to read silences, and lately, Jonathan's silences had started to change. They weren't soft anymore. They weren't thoughtful. They were evasive. The quiet between them, once a space for warmth, began to feel like a warning. He'd started spending more time behind closed doors, his eyes once attentive, now flicked back to screens. Dinners that had become light and filled with inside glances were now muted by excuses. She didn't ask, but she knew. Something was slipping, and then it happened. She was walking down the East Wing corridor late one evening, barefoot, wrapped in a sweater, when she heard his voice through a half-closed door. It was low, frustrated, strained. Shouldn't have happened. It was a mistake. She froze, his voice again, firmer this time. No, it can't happen again. That part of my life is over. She didn't need to hear the rest. She turned, walked back down the hall, and locked herself in her room. The cold she felt in that moment wasn't just from doubt. It was the familiar chill of being discarded. Again, the next morning, an envelope arrived. No name, no return address. It's just a plain white rectangle on her nightstand. Inside were 4 high-quality photographs. Jonathan in a Manhattan hotel lobby, and standing next to him smiling, reaching for his arm, Victoria. Wells, the X. In one frame, her hand lingered near his. In another, his eyes seemed almost soft, and beneath the photos, a handwritten note: "You were never more than a distraction. Be careful what you build on sand. C. Christine," of course. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just is shut down. She spent the rest of the day alone. No staff, no movement. Just the rain tapping against her window and the fireplace flickering low. Jonathan knocked. Twice. She didn't answer. The third time, he added his voice. "Can we talk?" "Say yes." But she didn't say no either. He stepped inside slowly, like the room had become sacred ground. She handed him the envelope without looking at him. He flipped through the photos. Read the note. Closed his eyes like he'd been punched. Then, quietly, "She found me. I didn't invite her. She showed up unannounced at the hotel where I had a meeting. I told her to leave. She didn't listen. She made sure the photographers saw. It was calculated." Rachel stared at the fire. Her voice was steady, but her soul was breaking. "You should have told me. I thought I was protecting you from more drama." She gave a sharp, joyless laugh. "You still don't get it?" Jonathan looked at her helplessly. "I didn't need protection," she said. "I just needed the truth." He stepped closer, but something between them had already broken. Not because of the photos. Not even because of Victoria. Because the trust between them, delicate, still growing, had been stepped on before it had a chance to take root. Silence fell. Heavy. He wanted to speak. To fix it. To undo whatever this was. But she wasn't reachable in that moment. No, not emotionally. Not spiritually. That night, she didn't sleep in the mansion. She drove 2 hours north, to the abandoned Monroe family house. The one Christine had turned into a glorified storage closet for memories she didn't want. Rachel turned on the dusty lights, played a scratched vinyl of her mother's favorite song, and sat in front of the cracked mirror where her mother used to brush her hair before school, and she cried. Not from betrayal, but from disappointment, because she had started to believe in him, and belief, when broken, hurts more than lies. The next morning, she didn't have answers, but she had a decision. She returned to the Cross estate, changed into jeans, tied her hair back, and called her personal accountant. "I want to make a transfer," she said. "To which account, Mrs. Cross?" She took a breath. "To his company." The accountant paused. "Hayes Holdings?" "Yes. Use the inheritance my mother left me. Make it anonymous. No trail, no names." "Rachel, that's a substantial amount, I know," she said, "but the hole he's in is even bigger." He hesitated. She didn't do it. "And never tell anyone where it came from." She hung up, then went into the garden, sat beneath the willow tree, where Jonathan had once told her he no longer believed in anything. Now, she didn't either, but she could still choose. So she chose for him, because sometimes love isn't about reciprocity. Sometimes surrender, even when it breaks you, even when no one will ever know, even when he may never deserve it. And as the breeze stirred the leaves above her, Rachel closed her eyes not to forget, but to remember who she still was, after the photos. Rachel and Jonathan lived like strangers in the same house. No fights, no shouting, just absence. The conversations vanished, glances disappeared, silence turned sharp again, not in protection, but in fear. Fear of touching something that had already fractured. Fear of admitting how much it had come to matter. Jonathan didn't know it yet, but Rachel had already made her final decision, the night before. She had stood just outside his office, watching through the slight crack in the door as he paced, exhausted, overworked, and alone. Papers strewn across the desk. A bottle of scotch half drained. She knew Hayes Holdings was collapsing. She knew he wouldn't ask for help, not out of pride, but out of pain, and still, she wanted to save him, even if he never chose her. So, she had made the transfer quietly, anonymously, her entire inheritance, the one her mother had saved for Rachel's future. Gone all of it. No fanfare, no name. Just one note to the accountant. Do this like it's your last mission, and never tell anyone. Hours later, the funds hit the company's account. It was enough to stop the bleeding, to stabilize debt, pay suppliers, and salvage the most important expansion contract in Jonathan's career. He was stunned, spent hours hunting down the source, called silent partners. Checked every record, but nothing traced. It was like the money had fallen from the sky, or come from a miracle. But deep down, something in him already knew, and still, he didn't dare ask, because asking would mean facing the truth she had loved him more than he had ever allowed himself to believe. The next morning, Rachel left the estate without a word. She said she needed air, that she wanted to stop by the shelter, buy books for the kids, run errands. But Christine and Victoria had already begun to move. The anonymous transfer hadn't gone unnoticed. To Christine, this was a threat. To Victoria, a humiliation. Rachel Monroe couldn't be allowed to win. She couldn't be allowed to emerge from the ashes as the heroine of her own story. They didn't need to destroy her publicly. They just had to make her disappear. Quietly, the plan was simple, cruel. That afternoon, as Rachel stepped off a crosswalk, in downtown Manhattan, arms filled with donated books, a black car with no plates came tearing down the lane. No warning, no brakes, just the impact. Fast, brutal, she flew backward, striking her head on the concrete curb, books scattered across the sidewalk, screams erupted. The car didn't stop. It disappeared before anyone could take a photo. Rachel lay, bleeding. Still, Jonathan was in a board meeting with international directors when the call came. His phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the name, Lennox General Emergency, when he answered. The voice on the other end was clinical, controlled. Mr. Cross, your wife has been in an accident. Critical condition. Head trauma. She's being taken into surgery now. The room around him blurred. He stood up, didn't speak, just walked out by the time he reached the hospital. The operating room lights were glowing red, and Rachel was inside. Surrounded by masked surgeons and flickering monitors, the doctor's voice was grim. The impact caused a cranial bleed. We're doing everything we can. The next few hours will determine everything. Jonathan didn't cry at first. He just leaned against the wall, slid down to the floor in his $1,000 suit, and stared at the ceiling like it might offer an explanation. Rachel, wild, difficult, touchable. Rachel was fighting for her life, and she had nearly died saving his. For something he had never even thanked her for a loyalty he hadn't deserved. Hours passed in the early morning haze. Jonathan was finally allowed to see her. She lay in the ICU, pale and silent, tubes in her nose, her chest rising and falling with machine support. Her hair was matted with blood. A monitor beeped steadily beside her. He sat by her side and took her hand. It was cold, fragile. I know it was you, he whispered. The money, the transfer. You saved my company. His voice cracked. I was blind, out of pride, out of fear, out of this stupid instinct to keep control. He wiped a tear off her fingers. If you come back to me, I swear, I'll learn, I'll change. And for the first time in my life, I'll keep a promise. The machines kept beeping. Rachel didn't stir, but he stayed. All night. Because for the first time, Jonathan Cross finally understood. Love wasn't a contract, it was a wait, and his wait had just begun. Jonathan Cross didn't leave the hospital. For 3 days, he slept in a stiff armchair beside Rachel's bed. He drank cold coffee from paper cups. He ignored texts, canceled meetings, let the world unravel outside the hospital walls. He didn't care. He just sat beside her waiting, because the woman who had turned his life upside down, who had laughed at his power, challenged his pride, saved his empire, was now fighting for breath, and he didn't know how to exist without her. The nurse advised him to talk to her, even if she can't respond. She said gently, patients can sometimes still hear. It helps. So he did. He spoke more than he had in years. He told her about his childhood, The time he snuck out of boarding school and got caught sneaking back in with a puppy he found by the road. He told her about his mother, how she used to sing while cooking, even though she was always off-key. He confessed things he had never even told Graham. He admitted how afraid he was of love, how broken he had felt when Victoria left him, how hard it had been to believe again, and finally, how deeply he had failed Rachel by not saying the one thing that mattered most when it could have made a difference. I see you. On the fourth day, he stepped out for the first time. Just for a few hours. He needed answers. There was no way. Rachel's accident had been random. Not with the timing, not with her account emptied days before. He went to the police station with everything he knew, showed them the photos, the threats, the envelope. He handed over security footage from the estate showing Victoria's car tailing. Rachel, earlier that week, they connected the dots. The black car that hit. Rachel had been found abandoned and burned in a junkyard 2 towns over. But the damage patterns still matched. Street cameras confirmed it. Victoria had been following Rachel for hours before the crash. It was enough. Jonathan tracked Victoria down at a boutique hotel in Midtown. He confronted her in the marble lobby, cold and direct. "You nearly killed her," he said. Victoria tried to charm him. "You're emotional? That girl doesn't... You almost killed the only person who ever loved me without asking for anything back." Then the police arrived. Victoria Wells was arrested on the spot. Not long after, Jonathan faced Christine. She cracked quickly under pressure. She confessed to orchestrating the smear campaign, the photos, the note, even the attempt to discredit Rachel. If she ever spoke out, her public image shattered overnight. She lost her foundation board seat. Her invitations, her influence. Rachel's silence had protected her, but not anymore. That night, Jonathan returned to the hospital. He held Rachel's hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, and as he whispered a story about finding a new book in the estate, library, one with her name on the inside cover, something happened, a shift, a twitch. He looked down. Her fingers had moved. He froze. Then, slowly, Rachel's eyelids fluttered open. Her pupils were slow to focus. But they found him. She was awake, alive. "Still here?" Jonathan choked out a breath and leaned forward, his voice breaking with every word. "You came back." She blinked, her lips parted, cracked and weak. The first words didn't come out. He cupped her cheek gently. "Don't speak yet, just stay." Rachel blinked again. Then with effort her lips formed a faint whisper. "Did you cry for me?" He gave a broken laugh, smiling through a tear sliding down his jaw. "I cried for everything. For you. For us. For all the things I didn't say until now." She closed her eyes. But this time there was peace in it. A knowing he stayed by her. Sighed not as the man she had married on paper, but as the man who had finally shown up in the days that followed. Rachel began to recover slowly, but with strength. Jonathan turned the hospital suite into a garden flowers. Soft lighting, books. Beside the bed, he stayed, read aloud, helped her sip water, reposition her pillows, brush her hair when she was too tired to lift her arms. One afternoon, as he was tucking the blanket over her legs, she asked, "Why are you still here?" He looked at her, not flinching. "Because you stayed. Even when I gave you every reason to leave." She smiled, and this time, that smile was whole. Later, while he was gone, signing hospital forms, she found something left on the side table, an envelope. Inside, a formal return of the money she had transferred, every cent. On top of it, a handwritten note. No debts. No names. No past. "If you want to build something, let's use real bricks this time." She leaned back on the pillows. Her heart thudded softly. She didn't know if she was ready, but she knew he was, and maybe now. It was her turn to decide. The garden was in full bloom. It was the end of spring, and everything in nature had decided to celebrate Rachel's return. Roses burst open in deep crimson. Lavender waved in the wind. The river glittered beneath the morning sun like a promise whispered by the earth itself. Rachel walked slowly across the grass, still fragile, still healing but standing. The doctors had finally cleared her for light walks. Jonathan had prepared everything. A blanket on the stone bench beneath the willow tree. Her favorite fruit juice. A novel she hadn't finished. Even a small vase of white tulips. Every detail whispered, "I see you." He stood waiting under the willow. No tie, sleeves rolled up. Face softer than she remembered, not from rest, but from letting go. When she approached, he stepped forward. "You came," he said, voice full of something raw, something honest. Rachel smiled faintly. "You called." Dave offered his arm. They sat together on the bench, just like they had once before everything cracked open. For several minutes, they didn't speak. They didn't have to. The wind moved through the trees like breath. Then Jonathan finally broke the silence. "When I was a kid, my mother used to say, you can't force spring in the middle of winter. That everything true blooms. At the right time." Rachel turned, her head slightly. "Why are you telling me that now?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wooden box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't perform. He just opened it in front of her. Inside, a thin gold band, no diamond, no glitz, but on the inside, engraved in delicate script, "Now with love." Rachel stared at it, her breath caught. Jonathan looked at her, really looked. "Rachel Monroe," he said, voice steady. "You taught me how to listen to silence, how to see past masks, how to find the man I buried under success and pride." Took a breath. "I'm not offering security, not perfection, not promises I can't keep. I'm just asking for one thing, the right to walk beside you, to try, to fall, to build something real. That with you." Her eyes filled. He added more softly now, "This is not a proposal to fix what we broke. It's an invitation to build what we haven't started yet, if you want it." Rachel stared at him, then she reached for her left hand. Took off the old ring, the one from their contract, the one that meant safety, not love. She placed it gently on the bench between them. Then she picked up the new one and slowly slid it onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered, "but this time, I stay because I want to, not because I need to." Smiled, and in that smile, she saw the man he had always been, the one beneath the armor. They embraced, long silent. True, no orchestra, no witnesses. It's just two souls, choosing each other in full view of everything that had once pulled them apart. And then he kissed her, not in hunger, not in haste, but with care, with gratitude, with love. Months later, their world looked different. Rachel returned to her social projects. She expanded the shelter. She restored her mother's house into a space for women rebuilding their lives. Jonathan stepped back from constant control. He began working fewer hours. He planted hydrangeas with Rachel. In the garden, played piano for her while she fell, asleep on the couch. They didn't need perfection. They needed presence. They laughed, made mistakes. Chose each other daily because real love doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with quiet decisions, with the courage to stay with rebuilding on real bricks. And for Jonathan and Rachel, it began finally now with love.